If I could have any superpower in the world, it would definitely be the ability to fly. Above anything else, the ability to fly would rule every single superpower. You may disagree, but you're wrong. When I was 7, I thought that if I concentrated hard enough, I would actually be able to fly. You know, like Matilda does in the film Matilda, where she has to concentrate really, really hard to like move an object like this far, and her head shakes and everything. Well, I tried that as a 7-year-old multiple times, and probably more than just when I was 7, because I thought if I just focused hard enough, you know, I could fly. Although I did try flying a few times, I never actually successfully got off the ground. I don't know if it was because I couldn't concentrate hard enough or because you actually can't fly as a human, but I don't know, it didn't work. It wasn't until I was actually 10 years old that I flew for the first time. My grandparents took my brother and I on our first holiday abroad. We actually went to California. Can we have a whoop? None of you are from California, so no whoop. So I went to California and I went to Disneyland and I went to Universal Studios. And then, yeah, that was my first flight. And I can remember thinking as a 10-year-old, as I rocked up to the airport and we see the aeroplane, I thought, how is this big, massive chunk of metal going to be able to fly? And I was a little bit scared, and as the aircraft was taking off, you get that, the engines start making a right racket, and like, rrr. Well, I was at this point, that's exactly the noise an aeroplane engine makes. Well, at this point, I was kind of peeing my pants as a 10-year-old. I was a little bit scared on my first flight. I didn't really trust that this massive piece of metal would actually get me from A to B, because when I was 7, I concentrated really hard and I couldn't fly. And so what chance as a 7-year-old person or a big metal thing got to fly? Well, I thought, if I can't fly, this chunk of metal can't fly. That's the logic of a 10-year-old. So we're going to have a quick questions around your tables. When was the first time you ever flew, and were you scared? So most of you, I presume, have been on an aeroplane. If you haven't, that's an interesting fact. But the question is, when was the first time you flew, and were you scared? So you're going to have like 5 minutes. If you don't know everyone on your table, or even if you do, just introduce yourselves first to the people on your tables, and then chat about that question. 5 minutes starts now. So today we are continuing looking at the book of Mark. And today we're going to start looking at Mark 5 and starting on verse 21. So if you have your Bibles, get your Bibles out. Otherwise there's some Bibles in front of you. And Mark 5:21 we're going to start at. If you do not own a Bible, please take a Bible that's in front of you. It's our gift to you. We'd love you to have the Bible. So if you don't own a Bible, feel free to steal the Bible that's in front of you. Okay, I will give you... Does it? 759. 758. I'll give you another 30 seconds to find it. 758. Or Mark 5. It's on the screen. So, I'm going to start reading at verse 21. It's alright, Midge, you can shout. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. If you remember about 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, we talked about Jesus crossing the lake and he calmed a storm. And when Jesus reached the other side of the lake, which he just calmed the storm on, if you remember, we had a talk on Jesus casting quite a few demons out of someone into some pigs who then ran off a cliff. And that's kind of catching up to where we are today. So Jesus now crosses back over the lake. It seems that Jesus just likes crossing lakes. Maybe he should have been a ferry driver. But anyway, he was Jesus. So Jesus crosses back over the lake, and he's about to land, and he sees this large crowd waiting for him. You know, Jesus was popular. People wanted to see who Jesus was. People wanted to be around Jesus. If Jesus had lived in our day, everyone would have had their phones out and would be wanting a selfie with Jesus. And so the large crowd, they're all waiting for Jesus. And as soon as Jesus steps off the boat, they swarm around Jesus. But a man, he comes forward and he falls down on his knees in front of Jesus. Now we hear that this man's name is Jairus. And Jairus is a local synagogue leader. The man was probably quite important. The man was probably fairly wealthy. And the man held quite a high position within Jewish society. People like him didn't fall on his knees in front of other people. But we hear why he falls on his knees. It says, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so she will be healed and live." His daughter is dying, and so this guy is desperate. Now, I have a daughter, as some of you may have heard, / all of you will have heard. So I can kind of imagine what this guy was feeling. His daughter is probably the most important person in his life. His own daughter is dying right in front of him, and he cannot do anything about it. Now, no wonder he's desperate, and no wonder he falls on his knees, and no wonder he doesn't care what anyone else thinks. So Jesus, he begins to follow this man back to his house. And that's where we're going to pick up the story again. So we're going to carry on reading from Mark 5:24. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." So, Jesus is walking to Jairus' house. And the crowd, with all their selfie sticks, which they didn't have, but in our day they would have had them, they're crowding around Jesus. They're bumping into him. They're wanting to get close to this guy called Jesus. Now, a woman was in the crowd, and she'd been vaginally bleeding for 12 years. Now, this isn't just bad for her physical health. In the age without tampons and sanitary towels, she'd have probably been pretty smelly, pretty dirty, but it's also bad for her place within Jewish society. She would have been considered unclean, and she'd not be able to go into the temple, and she'd not be able to come into contact with anyone. She would not have been able to touch anyone, and no one would have been able to touch her. So for 12 years, this woman has had virtually no human contact. She's probably not got a husband, which meant she probably didn't have any money, and she probably had no place within Jewish society. The woman was the lowest of society, an outcast, unwanted, and unloved. Now, in an attempt to get rid of this bleeding, she'd visited all the doctors. She'd spent all her money trying to get rid of this. But it says they only made her worse. It says that she suffered a great deal. And we can only imagine what kind of archaic surgery they maybe tried to perform on her to try and get her better. And so as the crowd is bumping into each other, and as the crowd is bumping into Jesus, she in desperation has a thought that maybe if she touches Jesus' clothes, she will be healed. Now, as she reaches out and as she touches Jesus' clothes, it says immediately her bleeding stopped and she was free from her suffering. But it says Jesus, he felt that touch. He feels that something spiritual has happened. He feels that maybe some of his power has left him. And he turns to the crowd and he says to the crowd, "Who touched me?" Now, his disciples at this point think that Jesus is kind of off his rocker. And they give him probably the sarkiest answer you could give anyone at this time. So they say to him, "Look, Jesus, you are surrounded by people bumping into you. You've got this whole massive crowd of people and they all want to touch you. They all want to get near you. And you are saying, 'Who touched me?'" They think he's nuts. But the woman, she comes forward and she falls at Jesus' feet and she tells him, trembling with fear, the truth. This poor, dirty and unclean woman has just touched Jesus when she isn't even supposed to touch anyone. But Jesus' response is not anger, but he says this to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be free from your suffering." We continue the story in verse 35. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. So, Jesus is speaking to this woman who he's just healed. But then news comes in from Jairus' house that his daughter has just died. And Jesus, he turns to Jairus and he says to him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Now, at this point, I would probably be a wreck. I would be sobbing, I would be crying, I'd be shouting, I'd probably be annoyed at Jesus for being like, "Why do you stop for this woman? Like, my daughter." But I would be in a little bit of a wreck. Even at that time, people didn't come back from the dead. That wasn't a common thing that people believed, even 2,000 years ago. Throughout history, people know that once you're dead, you're dead. That's it. Life over, game over, that's it. But Jesus, he comes to the house, and there's people crying, there's people wailing. All the family, they are distraught from what is happening. Now, Jesus attempts to tell the mourners that, the girl's just sleeping, obviously, but they think he's just having a joke, which was a pretty sick joke at that time, really. That's not the appropriate time to make a joke. But Jesus, he enters the room where the little girl has died, and he takes her hands, and he says to her, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." And to everyone's complete amazement, the little girl, she opens her eyes, she stands up and she starts walking around. And I imagine everyone's jaws just hit the floor. These two stories are full of emotion. A father's desperate cry for his daughter, and a woman's last hope to be cured of a dreadful suffering. These two stories are also about fear. The father, he's afraid of losing his daughter. Jesus even had to tell him, don't be afraid. And we hear that the woman was trembling in fear. She was physically shaking. She was that afraid. Now, some of us will probably have been in situations where we are that scared that our heart pounds and we physically shake. We cannot stop it. Our hands are going absolutely mental. And however much we try, we cannot stop it. What makes you scared? What fills you with fear? I think we live in a world where people are scared. Scared about the future. Scared about their past. Scared about being alone. Scared about death. Scared about what other people think about them. Scared about not fitting in. Scared about not finding a husband or a wife. Scared about money. Scared about our physical health or our emotional health or our psychological health. Scared about losing something or someone that matters to us. And many other things that we as humans are scared about. And that fear, that can hold us back. It can stop us living the life we were created to live. It can stunt our relationship with God, and it can stop us truly loving others. In these two stories, we meet two people who were full of fear, but faith overcame their fear. Jairus got down on his knees before Jesus. He believed that Jesus could change things. And when Jairus hears that his daughter has died, Jesus turns to him and he says, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Jairus trusts Jesus with what is most precious to him. And likewise, the woman had faith. She pushed her way through the crowd to touch Jesus because she believed that just one touch could heal her. And Jesus' response to her is, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." It wasn't touching Jesus that healed her. It wasn't this special magic that went on. It was her faith that healed her. She believed that Jesus could change things. The woman trusts Jesus with what is most pressing to her. How many of us believe that God can change things? Now, most of us who have been to church our whole lives will say the right answer. We'll say, of course God can change things because God is God and God can do anything. But it's one thing to say that, and it's a completely different thing to believe that. I can say I'm not scared of crabs. I don't believe it. I can say that the moon is made of cheese. I don't believe it. One of the things that these two people had in common is they actually believed that Jesus could change things. They trusted that Jesus could actually make a difference in their lives. Jairus actually believed that Jesus could heal his daughter, and the woman actually believed that Jesus could end her suffering. They had faith in Jesus. Do we have faith in Jesus? Do we actually believe that Jesus can change things in our lives, in our community, and in the world we live in? Do we actually believe that? Or do we just sing songs about it and talk about it and hear nice preachers about it and say that to each other? But maybe we don't even believe it. Do we actually believe that God can change what is going on in our lives? What matters to us the most? What we're scared about? Do we actually believe that God can bring revival to this place called Ormskirk? That God can change our community? Do we actually believe that the world can be a better place? That God can act within the world and help the poor and the broken and the suffering? I think if we thought that God could actually change things, I think a lot more of us would pray a lot more. If we believed that God could change things in our lives, in our communities and in our world, I think we would find ourselves like Jairus and that woman. We'd find ourselves on our knees a lot more. Maybe one of the reasons why, for Christians, it's so easy to drift along. Maybe one of the reasons why our communities, they just stay the same. And maybe one of the reasons why the world doesn't seem to change is because maybe we don't have faith. We don't believe that God can or wants to renew, restore, heal, and change everything. In these two stories, we also meet two people who put what is most precious to them in Jesus' hands. They trust Jesus with everything that is important to them. Jairus, he could have gone to find a doctor. He could have scoured the land for the best doctor he could find. He could have stayed at home with his daughter thinking, if I stay home, I can do more than Jesus. But he doesn't. He goes out and he finds Jesus. He leaves his daughter and goes. And he gives over his daughter's life to Jesus. And the woman, she trusts Jesus to such an extent that she thinks that if she just touches him, she will be healed. Even though she isn't allowed to touch anyone, and she touches a near celebrity at that time, because she knows just one touch will heal her. The biggest thing going on in her life at the moment, she trusts Jesus with it. Anyone can trust God in the small things. Faith is being able to trust God with the things that matter to you the most. Faith is believing and trusting that God is in control, and God has the ability to transform everything. Darkness to light, hopelessness to hope, hate to love, fear to peace, and death to life. And the beautiful thing about trusting God is, as I'm about to quote Mr. Pringle, as Mr. Pringle would once say, or would say, he'd still say that now, once you pop, you just can't stop. I'm no longer scared of flying. I've now flown quite a few times, and I've never had a crash. Never once, never even been nearly had a crash. I've not ended up on a desert island and had to survive for 6 years, and then it goes all weird in the second and third series. But anyway, I've never had that. When I'm on a plane, I'm not scared anymore. I now have faith that this big piece of metal that I didn't think would be able to fly, well, I have faith that it's going to get me from A to B. I trust that I'm going to be all right on this plane, that I'm going to end up where I want to end up. And so far, it's worked out. I've never been in a crash. Faith gives birth to more faith. Trust breeds trust. The more times we trust God, the more times we believe that God can change things. The more times we give God control in our lives, the more times we will truly realise that we will not crash and burn. God is yet to let me down. Now, everything might not work out how I wanted it to. Everything might not work out how I pictured it to. But God is yet to let me down. Over the last 3 weeks, we've been watching Ed's story. And Ed was a guy who developed ALS, and he eventually succumbed to ALS. And even Ed would say, and did say in that video, that God hadn't let him down. God didn't cure him. That guy, he died a horrendous death. But God never let him down. The thing about God is that God will never let anyone down. Everything might not work out how you planned it to be, but God will never let you down. The only thing that stops us from living that truth out, the only thing that stops us believing that, is fear. What stops us living lives full of faith is fear. Rick Warren, a famous American pastor who wrote a very famous book called The Purpose-Driven Life, he said this: "Fear is a self-imposed prison that will keep you from becoming what God intends for you to be. You must move against it with the weapons of faith and love." Let us not live in prisons of fear, but in the freedom of faith. God can actually change things. God will not let you down. Trust him with everything in your lives. I'm going to pray, and then we're going to have something to reflect on that. Father God, I thank you that you have never let us down. I thank you that no matter how many times we let you down, you never let us down. I pray that we would all know and really know that we can trust you. I pray that you would give us faith. I pray that we would give over what is most precious in our lives to you, and we would trust you with it. Amen. So B, before she sang, she spoke about a song that had a line, "You take brokenness and make it beautiful." So in the reflection, we're going to watch that song. But while that song is going on, we would love to pray for as many people as we can. So we did this with Andy a few weeks ago, actually probably about 3 months ago, not a few weeks ago. So I'd love you to, the song's going to come up, but I'd love you to close your eyes or watch the song or just do anything that helps you zone out. And then if you would like someone to pray for you, just stick your hand up, and either me or B, it might just be me because B seems to have got caught with the baby. So it might just be me. I will quickly come over, I will lay a hand on your shoulder, and I will say like a 1 or 2 sentence prayer, and then I'll leave you. But this song, it talks about brokenness being turned into beauty. And I really think that that's something that Jesus is amazing at. And we hear that throughout the Bible, and we hear that in my life, and I think lots of you will have stories of being broken and that being turned into beauty. So if that's something you're struggling with, or you're feeling broken at the moment, or you're feeling afraid at the moment, I'd really encourage you, stick up your hand, and I'd love to come over you. I'll just put a hand on your shoulder. It'll be 1 or 2 sentence prayer, and that will be it. But we'll put the song on, and then,